When he smashed into me, I thought it would be the end. Then my 4-year-old slipped out and made the call that saved both of our lives. The night it happened, rain was falling so hard it sounded like the sky itself was angry. I was sitting in the car with my 4-year-old son, Liam, waiting for the traffic light to turn green. We were laughing about something silly, a song he made up about frogs and clouds, when the world suddenly broke apart. A black SUV ran the red light and slammed straight into my side of the car. The sound was deafening. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. For a few seconds, everything went white, like the world had blinked. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't move. My body felt heavy. Liam was crying softly in the back seat, his small hand shaking, calling out, "Mommy! Mommy, wake up!" But I couldn't answer. I wanted to, but my voice was trapped somewhere inside my chest. Then I saw him, the man who caused it. He stepped out of the SUV, looked at the damage, and ran. He didn't even check if we were alive. He just vanished into the rain. My head was bleeding, my legs numb, and my phone had flown somewhere under the seat. I thought that was it, that my son would have to watch his mother die in the dark. But Liam, my brave little boy, did something no one expected. He unbuckled his seatbelt, crawled out from the back seat, and found my phone. His tiny fingers dialed the only number he knew, his grandfather's. And then, with his small, trembling voice, he said the words that saved both our lives. "Grandpa, Mommy's hurt. There's blood everywhere." He stayed on the call, crying, explaining where we were until help arrived. The sound of sirens cutting through the storm still echoes in my mind. Because that night, my 4-year-old son became my hero. But what I didn't know yet, what I was about to find out in the weeks after, was that the man who hit us didn't just cause an accident. He had done it for a reason, and that reason would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. The sound of rain had always calmed me. That night, it didn't. It sounded angry. The kind of rain that hit the world like it wanted to wash something away. I remember every small detail. The wet smell of the road. The faint hum of the radio playing an old song. And my son's voice, soft, innocent, full of laughter. Liam was only 4, but he had the heart of someone much older. He loved stories. Silly ones, scary ones, even the ones I made up when I was tired. That night, he made one up about a frog who danced on clouds. He laughed so hard his little feet kicked the back of my seat. "Mommy, the frog is singing," he said between giggles. I smiled. "What's he singing about?" "About rain and candy." His laughter filled the car, and for a few beautiful seconds, the world was perfect. Then, in one heartbeat, it wasn't. I was at the intersection near Rosewood Street. The light turned green. I started driving. From the corner of my eye, I saw it, a pair of headlights moving too fast. There wasn't even time to scream. The SUV hit the driver's side with a force that felt like an explosion. Metal screamed. Glass flew. My body jerked sideways. I remember the world turning upside down and then silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. The kind that feels like death holding its breath. I couldn't move. My head hit the steering wheel hard. My vision blurred. Pain burned through my shoulder and leg. Somewhere behind me, I heard Liam cry, "Mommy, Mommy!" His voice sounded far away, like an echo underwater. I tried to answer, but no words came out. I tried to move my arm, but it wouldn't listen. My chest felt heavy, the air too thick to breathe. Then I saw something through the broken window, a shadow. A man. He got out of the SUV, looked at our car for a few seconds, then glanced around the empty street. Even through the rain and shattered glass, I could see his face. Sharp, cold, afraid. He looked right at me. And then he ran. He didn't check if I was alive. He didn't check if there was a child crying in the back seat. He just vanished into the rain. For a few seconds, I thought maybe I was dreaming. Maybe I'd wake up in bed, and Liam would be beside me with his frog story. But the smell of gasoline and blood told me this was real. The rain poured harder, hitting the cracked windshield. I blinked through tears, trying to see my son. "Liam," I whispered. My voice was barely a sound. "Sweetheart." He was in his car seat, shaking, tears streaming down his little face. He looked terrified. But when his eyes met mine, something changed in him. He stopped crying. He looked around, scanning the mess like a tiny soldier preparing for battle. "Mommy hurt?" he asked. His voice trembled. "Yes, baby," I whispered. "Mommy's hurt. But listen, you need to be brave." "Can you do that?" He nodded, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "Be brave," he repeated softly. I tried to move again, to reach my phone, but it was gone, thrown somewhere under the seat. I could feel my strength fading. My leg throbbed with pain and blood was dripping down my face. The car smelled of smoke. Then I saw something that made my heart stop. A small spark, somewhere near the front, a wire had snapped. Sparks were flashing in the dark. The car wasn't on fire yet, but it could be. "Liam," I said weakly, "you need to get out, baby. You need to call Grandpa." He blinked, confused. "How?" "My phone, it's under the seat. You can find it." For a moment he froze, just a scared little boy in the middle of a nightmare. Then he took a deep breath and said, "Okay." Watching him move was like watching hope crawl through darkness. He unbuckled his seatbelt with small, shaking hands. The click of the belt sounded louder than the storm. He slid off the seat, crawling forward through broken glass and twisted metal. His tiny hands searched under the seat, brushing against shards and wires. "Careful," I whispered. "Don't hurt yourself," he nodded, biting his lip. His face was streaked with tears, his little fingers trembling, but he didn't stop. Finally, he pulled out the phone. "Got it!" he said proudly, his voice a fragile spark in the dark. I wanted to smile. I wanted to tell him he was my hero, but my vision was fading and I couldn't find the strength. He unlocked the phone. He had seen me do it hundreds of times. Then he pressed the only number he knew. Grandpa. Miles away, my father was sitting in his chair watching the news when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. The number looked odd. But something in him must have known. When he picked up, he heard a small, trembling voice. "Grandpa? Liam?" he said, confused. "Buddy, where's your mom?" "She's hurt," Liam whispered. "There's blood." "Mommy's not moving." My father froze. "Where are you?" Liam looked out the window, trying to remember what I'd told him when we were driving. "There's a big sign," he said slowly. "It says Rosewood." "Mommy's car is broken." My father's heart raced. He called emergency services immediately. While he did, Liam stayed on the line. "Don't go, Grandpa," he said softly. "It's dark." "Mommy's sleeping." "I'm not going anywhere, champ," my father said, his voice breaking. "You stay with Mommy. Help is coming." "I'm helping," Liam whispered. He reached over to touch my hand. It was cold. He covered it with his small one, rubbing gently. "Wake up, Mommy," he said. "Please wake up." Minutes later, though it felt like hours, I heard sirens. Faint at first, then louder, closer. Red and blue lights flashed against the wet glass. Voices shouted. Hands reached in through the window. Someone pulled Liam out first. I saw him being carried away, crying, calling my name. Then everything went black. When I woke up in the hospital, there was a tube in my arm and a bandage around my head. The room smelled of antiseptic and silence. My father sat beside the bed, holding my hand. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "Liam's okay. He's sleeping." Tears rolled down my cheeks. I tried to speak, but my throat hurt too much. He leaned closer and whispered, "If it weren't for him, they might not have found you in time." I closed my eyes. My little boy, my 4-year-old son, had saved both our lives. But as I lay there listening to the sound of the rain outside the hospital window, a thought began to grow. That man, the one who ran away, he hadn't been a stranger. Something in me whispered that he had known exactly what he was doing, and soon I would find out how deep that truth went. The next morning, I woke up to the steady hum of machines and the faint rhythm of rain tapping against the hospital window. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The white ceiling, the smell of disinfectant, the slow beep of the heart monitor, it all felt distant, unreal, like a half-remembered dream. Then, reality hit me. The crash. The screaming metal. The sound of my son crying. And then his little voice on the phone. "Grandpa, Mommy's hurt." The memory made my throat tighten. I turned my head slowly, pain shooting through my shoulder. And there he was. Liam. Curled up on a chair beside my bed, his tiny hand gripping the blanket near mine. His chest rose and fell softly as he slept, exhaustion written all over his small face. Even in sleep, his fingers twitched, like he was still holding the phone, still protecting me. I wanted to pull him close, but I couldn't move much. My ribs ached, my arm was wrapped in bandages, and my legs felt like they didn't belong to me. The door opened quietly, and my father stepped in, holding a paper cup of coffee. His eyes softened when he saw me awake. "Hey," he said gently. "There's my girl." I tried to smile, but my lips trembled. "Dad, Liam." "He's fine," he said, moving closer. "He stayed up all night asking when you'd wake up. The doctor said you're lucky. Another minute or two, and it could have been—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I looked at my son again, and tears filled my eyes. "He saved me," I whispered. Dad nodded. "He did more than that. He gave the police enough information to find the car that hit you." I blinked. "They found it?" He hesitated. "They found it, yes, but not the man who was driving." The words settled in the air between us, heavy and cold. "They said the car was abandoned about a mile from the crash site," Dad continued. "It was registered under a false name. They're still investigating," I tried to remember. The headlights. The shadow stepping out. The man's face. It had been dark, raining, chaotic. But there was something familiar about him. Something that didn't feel random. Did they say what kind of car it was?" I asked. "A black SUV, a new one, expensive." My stomach turned. Black SUV. I'd seen that car before. It was the same kind of car I'd seen parked across from Liam's preschool 2 weeks earlier. I had noticed it because it had tinted windows and no visible plates. At the time, I thought maybe it belonged to another parent, or maybe I was just imagining things. But now it felt different. I took a slow breath. "Dad, I think I know that car." He looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I've seen it before," I said. "Outside Liam's school, twice." Dad frowned. "You're sure?" I remember the chrome trim. It looked too clean for an old car. I even mentioned it to one of the teachers once. He rubbed his chin, thinking, then maybe this wasn't an accident. The words chilled me. Not an accident. The thought dug deep into my mind like a splinter I couldn't remove. Over the next few days, I stayed in the hospital recovering slowly. The nurses said I was lucky to be alive. The police came to take my statement, but there wasn't much I could tell them beyond what I'd already said. Still, one question kept circling in my mind. Who was driving that car? Late one evening, when the room was quiet, I asked Dad to show me the police report. He hesitated but handed it to me. It listed the details. Vehicle, black Range Rover registered to Daniel Ross, false identity, license plate, stolen from another car, fingerprints, wiped clean witnesses. None. I stared at the page until the letters blurred. My head pounded. Then near the bottom, one line caught my eye. Insurance contact listed Hartman & Co. Legal Services. My breath stopped for a moment. Hartman & Co. That was where Ethan worked. My ex-husband, Ethan, and I had divorced 2 years earlier. At first, he was charming, successful, the man every woman wanted. But behind closed doors, he was something else, cold, controlling, unpredictable. After Liam was born, things got worse. He wanted to control everything, where I went, who I spoke to, even what Liam wore. When I finally left, he said something I'll never forget. "You'll regret walking away from me, Claire. I always get what I want." And now I was starting to wonder if this accident had anything to do with him. The next morning, I called the detective in charge of the case, Officer Brooks. His voice was calm but careful. "Ms. Monroe," he said, "I understand your concern, but right now we can't confirm any personal connection. The car was stolen before the incident. Do you have any leads?" I asked. "Not yet. We're reviewing nearby traffic cameras. If there's something, we'll find it." I wanted to believe him, but a feeling inside me whispered otherwise. When people want to hide something, they erase traces. And Ethan was very good at hiding things. That evening, after Liam was asleep, I sat by the hospital window, watching the rain streak down the glass. In the reflection, I saw my own face, pale, tired, scarred. But beneath the exhaustion, I saw something else. Resolve. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a mother with questions. And I would find the answers, no matter how deep I had to dig. The next week, I was discharged. My father drove us home in silence, the windshield wipers cutting through drizzle. Liam sat in the back seat, humming softly to himself. He was healing faster than I was, physically at least. But sometimes I'd catch him looking out the window with a faraway look, like he was remembering that night. When we reached home, I stepped inside and froze. Something was wrong. The air felt disturbed. I had left the lights off before the accident, but one lamp was on. A faint smell of cologne lingered, not my father's, and on the table lay an envelope. Plain white. My name written in neat handwriting. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You should have stayed quiet. Some accidents are meant to happen twice." No signature. No return address. But at the bottom of the page, printed faintly in gray, was a small logo. Hartman & Co. The room spun for a moment. It couldn't be. I showed it to my father. He read it, his jaw tightening. "Claire," he said slowly, "you need to take this to the police. Right now," but something in me froze. If Ethan really was behind this, reporting it might make things worse. He had influence, money, connections. I had a child and a small apartment. Still, I couldn't let fear win. "I'll take it tomorrow," I said quietly. "But first, I want to make sure Liam's safe. Dad nodded, though I could see the worry in his eyes. We'll get through this, he said. We always do. I looked at Liam, playing on the floor with his toy cars. His laughter filled the room again. And for a brief moment, I wanted to believe everything was okay, but deep down I knew. The man who hit us hadn't been trying to scare me. He had been trying to finish something. And now that I was alive, he wouldn't stop. That night, as I tucked Liam into bed, he looked at me with sleepy eyes and whispered, "Mommy, are bad people gone now?" I hesitated, then brushed his hair back. "Yes, baby. They're gone." But my voice shook when I said it, because I knew it wasn't true. After I handed the note to Officer Brooks, I felt a cold sleep walk through me. He promised to look into Hartman & Co., to check who printed the paper, to trace every small clue. His voice was steady, but I could hear the distance, the busy world moving on while my life trembled. That night, I sat in my small kitchen, the light low, and reread the note again and again. The words felt like a hand closing around my throat. You should have stayed quiet. Some accidents are meant to happen twice. No signature, no name. Just a threat wrapped in neat handwriting and the faint logo linking it to the man I had once loved. I thought of Ethan, his calm smile, his quiet good manners in public, the way he used his job, his contacts like keys to open doors. I thought of the nights he had told me I would regret leaving. How small those words had sounded back then, the kind of thing a bitter man might say. I had never believed he would actually act. Now the doubt spread like ice. Who would threaten a woman this way? Who would try to scare her into silence? The police called the next day. They had traced the paper to a small print shop 2 towns over. The owner remembered someone picking up a single envelope and a single sheet in gray ink. Not many customers asked for that kind of paper. It stood out. The man had paid in cash. He had worn gloves. He left no fingerprints. Officer Brooks told me they would canvass the area for camera footage. He also warned me to be careful. People who make threats often want to scare you more than hurt you, he said. Sometimes they bluff, but sometimes they don't. Bluff or not, my life had already changed. I slept with the light on, and every noise made my heart jump. I watched Liam more than I watched the news. He played as if nothing had happened, but sometimes he stopped, looked at me, and asked small questions about why someone runs away. I taught him that people make mistakes, that some people do bad things, and that good people help each other. At night, I whispered prayers I had never known before. One afternoon, while I was sorting mail, a delivery arrived at my door. A plain box. No return address. The courier looked uncomfortable handing it to me. I set it on the kitchen table and stared at it, hands trembling. Inside was another single sheet, folded like the other. I unfolded it slowly. This one was different. It had no threat. It had a picture taped to the page, a grainy phone photo of Liam at preschool taken from the street. He was laughing with another child, little backpack bright, the sun on his hair. Under the photo were 2 words in neat gray print. You should be grateful. My stomach sank. Someone had been watching my boy. Someone knew his small life and had taken a picture to remind me that they could reach him. I called the police immediately. Officer Brooks came over within an hour. He looked at the picture, frowned, and asked a dozen careful questions. "Did you notice anyone following you in these weeks?" he asked. "Has anyone been too interested in Liam?" I thought back. There had been the black SUV at preschool, a man in a dark hat outside the grocery store who left when I looked at him, a note on my car one morning that said, "Nice blue jacket," a silly, small thing I had ignored. Now it read like pieces of a puzzle. Brooks left with new instructions. He said he would ask the school to check if anyone had been loitering, and he would search traffic cams again. He told me not to post anything online about the threats. He said the people who made these moves liked attention and would plant more evidence to throw us off. After he left, I sat on the floor beside Liam's toys. I felt small and tired. The house that had been my safe place now had corners full of shadows. I wanted to wrap my child in a blanket and never let him go. But I also knew the opposite. Hiding would not save us forever. Hiding made fear bigger, so I made a plan. Not a heroic one. Not something that would stop a man who could hire others. A simple, quiet plan. Protect Liam, collect proof, learn who this man really was. I would not let this threat make us smaller. That evening, I did something I had avoided. I called an old friend, Maria, who knew about security and small investigations. Maria used to work in a different life. She had helped people track things and understand patterns. When I told her about the picture, she said 3 words that felt like a key. Watch his network. People who watch a child usually connect to someone in the child's life, she said. Check the people around Liam. Teachers, parents, delivery drivers. Someone could have been asked to take a picture. Sometimes the person who looks most helpful is the one who helps the wrong person. Her words made me look differently at the smiling faces I saw at the preschool gate. I began to think like someone pulling a thread on a sweater. Once you found the right thread, the whole thing might unravel. Over the next days, I watched. I watched the preschool gate when I dropped Liam, noticing car models, faces, the people who lingered too long when they had no reason. I asked the teacher, Mrs. Patel, about people who volunteered. She gave me a list of names. She was helpful and kind, a woman who had known Liam since he was small. I felt grateful she answered quickly. One name kept appearing on the list of helpers, Daniel Ross. My heart sank. The name matched the false registration on the SUV. Coincidence? Or a second rope tying the loose pieces together? I asked Mrs. Patel if she recognized the name. She did. He volunteered a few times last month, she said, frowning. But he stopped coming. He was quiet. He left quick. She tapped a finger on the table as if finding trouble in a book. When I asked for a description, Mrs. Patel's face tightened. He had a hat, and he always wore sunglasses. We thought he was shy. I'm sorry, Claire. I should have said something sooner. That night, I put the pieces together. The black SUV, the false registration, the Hartman and Cumber paper, the photo of Liam, the name Daniel Ross. A picture formed. Someone had planned to scare me, maybe worse. They had watched my child. They had used my old life and my ex-husband's connections as a map. I felt something cold and clear. Ethan had the means. Someone else had the time and the face. Maybe they worked together. Maybe someone had the phone to take the photo and the car to run away. Maybe they had been waiting to see if I would crumble. I thought of Liam's small hands dialing Grandpa. I thought of his brave voice. He had given us a chance. Now it was time for me to fight using what I had. Patience, attention, and the stubborn mother's will that would not let her child be hunted. The police found the camera footage 2 days later, a grainy loop of a man in a hat crossing the street near the preschool. The image was fuzzy, but the shape of the car and the walk matched the black SUV. Brooks said they were following it, asking for license plate reads, tracking past transactions at gas stations. When Liam heard, he squeezed my hand and said, "They won't come near our home. Mommy, Grandpa will guard us." He believed in simple answers, a guard, a hero, safety. His trust made me ache and strengthened me. That night, I kissed his forehead and watched him sleep, thinking about how small acts, a 4-year-old dialing a number, a single photo, could change a life. I thought about courage and how it comes in quiet packages, and I thought about the man who had left a note on my table. He had wanted to scare me into silence. Instead, he had shown me where to look. After the police found the grainy footage, I felt both relieved and uneasy. Relieved because we now had a direction, uneasy because knowing where to look also meant knowing how close the danger had been. The world felt smaller and sharper. Every face in the street could be a clue. Every stranger could be a part of a puzzle. I began to pull at the threads. My first move was small and careful. I made a list. Names from the preschool, people who had been around lately, odd cars I had seen, the delivery drivers who came by our block. I wrote times beside each name when I had seen them, what they were carrying, the color of their coats. It felt silly to be so methodical, but when you are afraid, lists can steady you. Maria helped. She taught me how to notice patterns. People who plan things like this are sloppy in one place, she said. They try hard to erase the big marks, but small habits reveal them every time. She showed me how to check public posts, to watch when someone suddenly changes their routine, or when a new account pops up that follows local news. It felt like detective work in a cheap movie, but every small clue mattered. One afternoon, I followed a thread that led to a coffee shop near the preschool. It was a place I passed often but rarely entered. I sat at a small table with my tea and watched. Parents came and left, teachers chatted, and the barista called names in a steady rhythm. I kept my eyes on the door. About 30 minutes in, a man walked in who made my heart skip. He wore a plain cap and sunglasses, but his gait and the way he rubbed his chin felt familiar. He ordered a coffee, then sat with his back to the window. He pulled out his phone and typed quickly, looking around only once. I didn't move. I kept him in sight, telling myself to breathe slowly. After 10 minutes, he left. I watched him go, and when he turned the corner, I followed at a distance. He walked fast, his steps sure. He stopped by a used car lot, peered at license plates, and then drove a small sedan away. I wrote down his license plate number and sent it quietly to Maria. She called me within minutes. "Run it," she said. "Check past registrations. See if it links to anyone connected to Hartman & Co." Maria's methods were blunt but effective. She wasn't a cop, but she had ways to find things ordinary people miss. When she called back, her voice was low with something like triumph. "Claire, that plate was rented 3 times this month. Each time different names. Someone's moving cars around to be safe. But the registrations trace back to a same small rental agency, one that lists Hartman & Co. as a client sometimes." My stomach dropped. The rope tightened. The pattern was clearer. It wasn't only Ethan's company as a logo on paper. It was people moving cars, changing plates, using small rental services to hide. Every small move felt planned. I told Officer Brooks about the man I'd seen at the coffee shop and the license plate. He thanked me and said his team would check the lead. He also warned me again to be careful. "Don't follow them too close," he said. "If they notice, they'll slip away." I nodded, but my hands felt like they wanted to move. Sitting still was not my strong suit. I wanted to do something that felt like control, an action that would protect Liam and me, so I took practical steps. I bought new locks for our doors. I changed our daily routines. I told the preschool that only my father or I would pick up Liam, and they made a note in their system. Maria helped me set up a small camera near the door that would alert me when someone came close. These actions were small, but they gave me a feeling of armor. At night, I mapped connections on a wall chart, thread-tied pieces of paper to create lines between names, photos, and car descriptions. It looked messy, but the web began to show form. Daniel Ross's name connected to the rental plates, the Hartman and Carmer's logo linked to the paper, and a new name, Marcus Vale, appeared on a few receipts. Marcus was a contractor who had done odd jobs near the preschool. He had a truck. He liked to keep to himself. A witness had mentioned a man with a truck parking near the lot the night the SUV was found. Connections like these can be fragile. One wrong assumption can break everything. So I checked and checked again. Maria used different sources to verify the receipts and the contractor's records. Officer Brooks put the name Marcus on his short list. It felt like a small win. Then I found something that chilled me more than the note or the photo. A voicemail on my phone from a blocked number. At first I ignored it, thinking it was a telemarketer. But when I listened, there was a low voice, distorted, quiet. Tell her to stop poking. Or the next one will be worse. The message ended with a click. I saved it. I handed it to Brooks. He said it was useful. We can forensically clean it up, he said. Find the source. He looked tired and honest. The presence of a voice was proof that someone wanted to scare me publicly. But it also made me furious. Someone was threatening my child's life and treating it like a game. I remembered Ethan's eyes when we argued, his thin smile when he said he always gets what he wants. I remembered nights he drove off in his car saying he had work. I remembered how he used people when he needed them. But I also remembered his comfort in power. Not just the power of money, but the power to make someone small feel helpless. That kind of man can become dangerous when hurt. A week of small leads turned into another week of small wins. Brooks called to say they had pulled a plate read from a traffic camera near the used car lot. The plate matched the one I had written down. They tracked it to a small rental office. The rental office had a security camera. Brooks had asked for the footage and seen a familiar man walking into the office. It was the same man from the coffee shop. The same gait, the same habit of rubbing his chin. Brooks was building the case slowly. He always said law moves like molasses, but molasses reaches its goal if you wait. That evening, I told Liam we were going to the park. He smiled, and for a few hours we let normal life hold us like a warm blanket. He played with his toy cars, made up new frog songs, and asked for a snack. I felt grateful for these small pockets of ordinary life. They reminded me why I fought. When we came home, a new letter sat on the table. This one was different. A simple postcard with a picture of a lighthouse and a short note. Stop digging. No logo. No name. The message slid under the door like a colder threat. I picked it up and slowly read the words again. Stop digging. It was meant to frighten me into giving up. But instead it made me angrier. Whoever thought they could intimidate me into silence did not know my stubbornness. They did not know the thread of steel mothers carry when their children are in danger. That night I slept poorly, thinking of the men moving cars, the hidden cameras, and the quiet voice on my phone. I thought of how small actions, the slam of brakes, a child's brave call, could change the path of a life. I thought of the threads I had pulled and how they were starting to form a net. The plan was no longer just about discovery. It was about teaching my son that courage can be quiet and steady. It was about building a life where he could run without fear. And it was about showing whoever sat behind these threads that we would not be pushed aside. The threads were becoming a plan, and I was ready to pull harder. The postcard changed something inside me. Until that day, the fear had been distant, an invisible threat lurking at the edges of my life. But that simple message, stop digging, written in neat, confident handwriting, turned the fear into something I could feel. It made the air heavier, the silence sharper. I kept it on the table all night, staring at it under the warm yellow light of the kitchen lamp. The ink had smudged slightly in one corner, as if the writer had touched it with a wet finger. It was such a small detail, and yet it made me shiver, because it reminded me of someone, Ethan. He used to write that way, his fingers always leaving a faint mark because he pressed too hard with the pen. Every time he signed his name, there'd be a shadow of ink where his hand rested. Coincidence? Maybe. But in my gut, I knew it wasn't. The next morning, I woke up early. I didn't want Liam to see the card. He was still asleep, his small hands clutching the corner of his blanket. His face looked so peaceful, so far from the chaos circling around us. I kissed his forehead softly and whispered, "You're safe, baby." Then I tucked the postcard into my coat pocket and drove to the police station. Officer Brooks looked up when I entered. He'd been expecting me. He took one look at my face and sighed. "Another message?" I nodded and handed him the card. He studied it carefully, flipping it over, scanning the edges. "Same style," he said. "Same paperweight. Probably printed from the same shop. This person's confident." He placed it in an evidence bag, labeling it carefully. Then he looked at me and said, "They're getting nervous." "What do you mean?" "When threats turn into warnings, it usually means you're closer to something they want to hide." His words sent a chill through me. Closer to what? Later that afternoon, I stopped by Maria's office. She was sitting behind her desk, surrounded by papers and 2 half-empty coffee cups. When she saw me, she raised an eyebrow. "You look like someone who's just been challenged." I handed her the photo of the postcard. She studied it, then leaned back in her chair. "He's testing you," she said simply. "He wants to know if you'll back off." "But you won't, will you?" I shook my head. "Not until I know who's behind this." She smiled faintly. "Good, because I think I found something that might help." She turned her laptop toward me. On the screen was an image from a traffic camera, blurry but recognizable. A man standing near the used car lot, hat, sunglasses, slight tilt to the head. But this time Maria had enhanced the image enough to reveal something new. The man was talking to someone inside a car. A familiar car, a silver Lexus, Ethan's car. My heart started to race. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. "This footage was from a week before your accident," Maria said quietly. "The timestamp shows it was late evening. The Lexus was parked across the street for 15 minutes. The man with the hat arrived, talked through the window, and then left. Do you have the audio?" She shook her head. The camera was too far. "But Claire, I think we can guess what was discussed." I sat back in the chair, my pulse thudding in my ears. It was all coming together, too perfectly to be chance, the car that hit me. The false name on the registration. The notes. The photo of my son. Now Ethan's car. It all pointed in one direction. Ethan had orchestrated it. But why? What could he possibly gain by hurting me or scaring me into silence? And then I remembered something. A few weeks before the crash, I had received a call from a bank officer. He said my name was still listed on one of Ethan's old business accounts, an account that had seen suspicious transfers. I had ignored it, thinking it was just leftover paperwork from our divorce. But what if it wasn't? What if he was using my name to move money illegally? And what if I was getting too close to finding out? The realization hit like ice water. The accident wasn't just about revenge. It was about protection. He had tried to erase the one person who could expose him. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house made my heart jump. Liam slept soundly in his room, clutching his stuffed bear. I sat outside his door, listening to his breathing, watching the shadows move across the walls. Around midnight, I heard it, a faint sound outside. A whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind. But then it came again, a low, almost hesitant voice. Too soft to make out the words, but close enough to know it was human. I stood slowly, my pulse quickening. I moved toward the front door, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Through the peephole, I saw nothing. Just darkness and the faint flicker of the streetlight. Then a shadow moved across the porch, slow, deliberate. My hand tightened around the doorknob. Whoever it was stopped just outside, close enough that I could hear breathing. And then 3 soft knocks, not loud, not urgent, just measured. I froze. Every part of me screamed not to open the door. But then, from the other side, a voice whispered, so low I almost missed it. Claire, we need to talk. My blood went cold. I knew that voice, Ethan. He was right outside my door. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. It had been 2 years since I'd seen him in person. He sounded calm, too calm. I wanted to shout to wake my father to call the police. But part of me needed to hear what he had to say. What do you want? I asked through the door, my voice shaking. I just want to talk, he said quietly. I know you've been asking questions. I think we can settle this privately. Settle what, Ethan? He sighed, and the sound of his breath against the door made my skin crawl. Things got complicated. You were never supposed to get hurt. But you need to stop before this gets worse. Before this gets worse, it was confirmation. He was behind it. I stepped back from the door, my heart pounding. Leave us alone, I said firmly. If you come near me or Liam again, I'll go to the police. He chuckled softly. Oh, Claire. The police can't protect you from what's coming. And then silence. No footsteps, no voice. When I looked through the peephole again, he was gone. I stood there for a long time, the words echoing in my mind. The police can't protect you from what's coming. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew one thing. This wasn't over. Ethan was planning something bigger, something final, and if I didn't find out what it was soon, he would make sure my accident wasn't the last one. That night, I moved Liam into my room and locked every door and window. I sat awake until dawn, watching the first light creep through the blinds. I wasn't the same woman who had cried in that hospital bed weeks ago. Fear was still there, yes, but it had changed shape. It had turned into something sharper. Resolve. He wanted me to stop digging. But I had just started. After Ethan's words at the door, the world felt smaller and sharper. He had warned me, the police could not protect me. That sentence lived in my head like a threat and a promise. I knew then this was not only about a car or a scare. This was about paper, accounts, and a plan meant to bury me. I started with the bank call I had ignored weeks earlier. The clerk had said my name was linked to suspicious transfers in an old account. I thought it was a mistake. Now I knew it was not. I contacted the bank again, this time with purpose. I asked to see every statement that mentioned my name for the last 3 years. The banker hesitated and asked for legal permission. I said I would come in. I walked into the branch, my legs heavy and steady, and sat at the desk. I was polite but firm. I told them I was a victim of a crime and needed copies. When they passed the papers, my hands trembled. The statements were a mess of numbers, wire transfers, and names I barely recognized. Accounts opened and closed. Money moving across borders. Some transfers listed client services, others said consultancy or legal fees. My name appeared as a signatory on a Shell account. I had no memory of signing anything. My signature, though, looked familiar, a woman's hurried loop, like mine. A cold realization settled in. Someone had used my name to hide money. That meant if authorities traced the funds, they could trace it to me. If I were careless, I could be accused of fraud. If Ethan had placed my name there, he could erase his fingerprints and point the blame at me. I took copies of the statements and left the bank like a person carrying a live coal. I did not tell my father everything. He worried enough. I could see it in his face when I returned home. Instead, I called a lawyer I trusted, Anna Patel, a woman with a reputation for quiet competence. She had helped my family with small matters before. I needed someone who would move with speed and care. Anna read the files in her office, her jaw tight. "They forged your signature," she said finally. "Or someone had you sign a paper under false pretenses. Either way, this looks like the start of a framing operation." She tapped a pen against the papers, eyes sharp. "If we don't act fast, you could be investigated for money laundering or tax evasion. Those charges can ruin you. How do we stop it?" I asked, voice small. "First, we document everything," she said. "We make a paper trail proving you were not involved. Second, we find who has access to your information and why. Third, we notify the bank officially and freeze any suspicious movement linked to your name. Finally, we inform law enforcement with clear evidence. But be careful. Sometimes those alerts can make the people behind it act faster." Her caution felt like a thin rope stretched tight between me and safety. I agreed. We moved quickly. Anna sent letters to the bank and to the accounts flagged in the statements. She filed reports and asked for temporary freezes. She also asked for the bank's internal logs, who had opened those accounts, and from which IP addresses any online access occurred. She said we needed to trace the human parts. Who ordered papers, who signed for envelopes, who visited certain branches. Those people left trails. Meanwhile, I dug through my own records. Photos, bills, old papers from the divorce, emails. I found one email, old and seemingly harmless, where I had replied to a request for a meeting at a coffee shop. The sender's name was a loose variation of someone who worked at Hartman & Co. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now it looked like another stitch in the fabric. I thought of the man with the hat, the rental plates, the postcard, the photo of Liam. They all connected to people with access to my life. Someone had slowly built a map to use against me if I protested. Days passed in a blur of meetings and checks. Officer Brooks called often with updates. He had found the person who had rented the black SUV, a small-time fixer named Marcus Vale. Marcus had been paid in cash, but he left a receipt tied to a courier company. Brooks followed that to a locker rental, a place where people leave packages without names. Inside, they found printed materials, blank envelopes, a stack of the gray paper used for threats, and a receipt from Hartman & Co. A signature on another document in the locker matched the handwriting on the postcard. Polymer testing was pending, but the evidence stacked up. Ethan's link to the scheme was no longer just a suspicion. It began to look like an ugly truth. The man who had said, "I always get what I want," had used his reach to buy silence. He had people who could move cars, rent plates, print threats, and take photos. He had the means to create a story that put me at the center of crime. While all this moved in the world of evidence, a quieter war happened at home. Threats had a way of changing how people looked at you. Friends who once called often ghosted. Some avoided me in public. I felt isolation grow around us like a slow fog. Even my small confidence was tested when a reporter from a local paper called sniffing for a scandal. I refused to answer. Anna advised silence. Public attention could be dangerous. One late night, I found a new email in my inbox. Anonymous, short, stop, walk away. We can make this easy. No signature. No address. Just a line meant to make me fearful enough to retreat. I didn't retreat. I forwarded the email to Anna. She turned it into evidence and added it to the case file. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "You need to take control of the story," she said. "If someone else controls the narrative, they win. If we speak at the right time with the right facts, we can turn the light on them." It felt risky, but it made sense. Hiding gave power to the people who wanted to hurt me. I had been hiding because I thought silence meant safety. But silence had become a space for them to move. If I stepped out with a truth that matched evidence, I could change the move. Anna arranged for a private meeting with a trusted financial journalist, Lena Brooks, not the officer, but a reporter known for exposing corruption quietly, carefully. We met in a small cafe, voices low. I laid out the documents. Lena listened, eyes moving over the papers like a hawk. She asked good questions. She promised to look deeper, but warned about the speed at which such stories explode. "We'll do this carefully," she said. A quiet release verified facts. If they push, we push harder. I felt a mix of fear and relief. For so long I had been reacting. Now I was acting. At home, I installed a few more safety measures. A second camera aimed toward the street. A lockbox for important papers. I changed passwords, closed old accounts, and told my father to keep the car close during the night. Liam asked few questions. He watched. He played with blocks and made up songs. He made the ordinary noise of childhood, and that sound became my anchor. The week moved forward with a new momentum. Police investigations advanced. Alan, a nickname for the bank analyst who helped us, found IP addresses that linked to an office at Hartman & Co. It was not direct evidence of Ethan's hand, but it was a path. The rental receipts and the locker items tied to Marcus and Hartman showed an organized campaign. When I thought about how close we'd come to losing everything, I felt both anger and awe. Someone had tried to bury me beneath paper and lies. But the plan had holes. People make mistakes. They leave receipts, they rent the wrong locker, they take pictures from the wrong angle. Those small errors built the ladder we climbed. One morning, as I left Liam's preschool, a man in a suit approached me with a polite smile. He introduced himself as a representative from a community charity who wanted to offer a donation after hearing about our canceled gala. I kept my smile tight and asked for his card. On it, the company name read Hartman & Co. My hands went cold. He said he wanted to help rebuild trust in the community. I thanked him and went home. I told Anna. She said quietly, "He's studying you. Keep the card." I dropped the card into a file labeled Hartman Contacts, a small victory, paper in our control now. I had begun to learn that control is not about grand gestures. It is about collecting the crumbs of proof, following them, and not letting yourself be silenced by fear. Ethan had set a trap, but every trap has a trigger. My job was to find it before it closed for good. That night, after Liam slept and the house was quiet, I spread the papers out across the table. The map I had drawn earlier looked denser now, full of routes and names and bad intentions. But underneath the mess, a pattern shone. A route that led back to Hartman & Co., and to a man who once held my life like a coin in his palm. I folded the map carefully, feeling the weight of what we had found. The trap he set had nearly caught us, but we were still here. We had proof. We had people on our side. And most of all, we had Liam's small, brave heart that dialed a number in the rain and changed the course of everything. The days after the discoveries felt like standing on a shore while the tide pulled information closer and closer until it revealed what had been buried. We had proof. We had receipts, rental records, a locker full of threat materials, and camera footage showing the man who moved the cars. Hartman and Co. showed up again and again like a bruised watermark. And in the middle of it all was Ethan, calm, distant, and as dangerous as ever. Anna, Officer Brooks, Maria, Lena the journalist, and I sat at a long table in a small conference room. The light outside was pale and cold. We spread our documents, emails, timelines, and phone records across the table like a battle map. Each page had a story. Each story pointed back to a plan someone had set in motion to ruin me. "This is when you draw the line," Anna said, tapping the center of our map. "You decide what will no longer be tolerated. You decide how far you'll let this go and where you push back." Her voice was steady, professional, the voice of someone who had fought many quiet courtroom battles. I looked at the people around the table. Each had become a small army for us. Officer Brooks's jaw was tight with the slow, stubborn patience of police work. Maria kept whispering technical ideas about following digital trails. Lena folded and refolded her notes, thinking about timing and impact. My chest tightened slightly with fear, but beneath it was a deep, hardening resolve. "This is the line," I said finally. "We expose the scheme. We name the companies, the rental links, the receipts. We show the paper trail. We do it in a way that journalists cannot ignore and law enforcement cannot avoid." My voice sounded small in the big room, but the words were mine. Anna nodded. "We prepare one package for the police. We prepare a verified package for the press. We time both so they support each other. Law will move, but the court of public fact can move faster. If we do this right, people start asking questions and the ones who covered tracks will panic." Lena leaned forward. "I can run a careful piece. Verified documents, bank trail, locker contents, and a story that focuses on the impact, on you and on the women who relied on the foundation. We'll avoid names until we're sure, but if the bank confirms the fraudulent accounts linked to Hartman and Co., that's a strong lead." Officer Brooks agreed to present our evidence to the district investigator that afternoon. "We will move as fast as the law allows," he said. "We have enough to question more people, and Marcus Vale is cooperating a little. He's pointed to a few helpers he was paid by. We need more primary evidence, emails, authorization papers, or direct money traces." The plan was careful. It was legal. It was slow. It was also dangerous, Ethan noticed. He had to. People who orchestrate schemes watch the spaces where light threatens them. He had friends. He had resources. He knew how to make oil slicks to hide footprints. He also had time because power buys people patience. The next week, my phone buzzed with calls, some polite, some venomous. A local TV station called, asking for a comment. I refused. Anna told me to let Brooks handle official statements. "We choose the channel," she said. "We don't play into gossip." That evening, someone left flowers at my gate. White lilies, Richard's favorite. The card was blank. It could have been kindness, or it could have been a message, a reminder of things that used to be. The ambiguity was exhausting. Lena cautioned, "They will try to muddy the water. They will leak rumors, create distractions. Be ready." She had seen it before. Power tries to survive by shifting blame and creating scandals that distract from the real trail. Our first public move was small and private. Officer Brooks visited the district office with our compiled files. He handed the documents to Investigator Nolan with a quiet seriousness. Nolan read, then placed them on his own desk and made calls. Marcus Vale's name, the locker receipt, the Hartman link. Now it was in an official file and not just in our hands. The police moved. They issued a search for rental records and requested bank cooperation. We were past a rumor now. We were into investigation. But that did not stop the pressure. Ethan began to push back. Not openly. He played the part of a respectable businessman in public, but he used subtler moves. I began to notice people from his world appear around me in strange ways. A polite representative from Hartman & Co. attended a school meeting for community outreach. He asked to volunteer for a fundraiser. Lena watched him at a distance and took notes. She later told me she liked his smile and thought it practiced, not sincere. One night, I found a small envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a photograph of my father, older, kind, the man who had driven halfway across town to get us from the hospital, with a single word written, "Watch." Someone was pressing my family like a finger on a bruise. That same day, a letter from the bank arrived. They had frozen the suspect accounts for now, but legal procedures would take time. They recommended not to post anything online and to stay low. The tension in the house became like an electric hum. Every ring of the phone made my heart jump. But also, people started reaching out. Old volunteers checked in. A woman I had never met brought by soup and told me how the heart promise changed her life. Small kindnesses balanced the heavy threats. For every shadow, a light pushed back. We planned the press release on a Wednesday for a Thursday morning drop. The timing was strategic, early enough to make opinion cycle through the day, late enough after police filing that the facts matched. Lena drafted a careful piece that told my story, the banking evidence, and how the scheme hurt vulnerable women. She included copies of documents as attachments and promised to hold identifying names until she had confirmation. Anna prepared legal language to accompany it, statements about forgery, misuse of funds, threats, and the active investigation. We wanted to be firm but not reckless. We wanted to ensure that if the press published, the police would be ready and the facts would stand up. On Wednesday night, Ethan called. His voice was cool. "Claire," he said, "this is getting messy. You don't want to drag people into public fights?" I recognized the tone, thinly veiled threat wrapped in concern. "It's not about me," I said quietly. "It's about truth." He didn't respond. I told the group we would proceed. Lena would publish the article with the documents bundled. Brooks would present the case to the district attorney. Anna would ensure we had a good legal anchor. Maria would monitor online shifts. We were ready. The morning the story ran, my hands shook as I opened the article. Lena's writing was clear and careful. The headline was balanced. Local charity founder exposes paper trail tied to corporate firm. Police investigate. The piece laid out the evidence without sensationalizing. It described my crash, the threats, the lockers, the receipts, and the link to Hartman & Co., and the police action. It emphasized the work of the foundation and the damage caused by corruption. Responses came like rain. Some supportive notes warmed me. "We stand with you," wrote volunteers. Some comments were cruel. People with power use noise to drown out meaning. But the main thing was this: the story made people look. When light hits a place for long enough, even the darkest corners show dust. Within hours, the call started. Investigators called to ask more questions. Hartman & Cobras issued a brief statement denying involvement, calling the claims serious and under review. Ethan released a calm message to his business partners. "I am cooperating fully with authorities." The difference between public words and private actions can be wide. At home, Liam asked a simple question. "Is the bad man in jail now?" I told him the truth in a way he could hold. People are looking at the papers, baby. People are checking. He nodded, then ran off to play frogs and clouds. He was for now still a child. I tried to keep it that way. That evening, as rain began again, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea. The line I had drawn earlier remained firm. We had taken action. We had called out a pattern. We had shown the trail. Whether law would close, it was up to slow, careful work. But for the first time since the crash, I felt not simply reactive, but active. That shift mattered. Still, the shadow moved. Power resists. People who profit from lies do not give them up easily. The line in the sand was drawn. Now the real work began. Holding it in place when the tide rose and keeping the people I loved safe while the truth did its work. And in the quiet that night, I listened to the rain and felt the small, steady pulse of courage inside me, soft, stubborn, and ready to stand. When light finally hits the truth, darkness doesn't disappear. It fights back. And Ethan fought back harder than I'd imagined. The morning after Lena's article went live, the phone started ringing nonstop. Some calls were kind, old friends, donors, volunteers. Others were cold and calculated. Reporters wanted quotes. Bank representatives wanted meetings. And then there were the silent calls. Long pauses, no breathing, just quiet presence. By noon, my lawyer, Anna, called with a warning. Claire, brace yourself. Ethan's filed a defamation notice against you and Lena. He's claiming your accusations are false and damaging to his business reputation. My stomach twisted. Can he do that? After everything? He can, she said, her voice calm, but that doesn't mean he'll win. It's a move to intimidate you, to make you back down. We'll respond formally. I hung up and stared at the rain streaking down the window. It never ends easily, does it? By evening, Ethan's PR machine was in full swing. A local business journal published his official response. He called the story a misunderstanding, claiming he had no involvement in any financial misconduct and that I was emotionally unstable and seeking attention after a family tragedy. The words burned through me like acid. Emotionally unstable. Seeking attention. He wasn't just denying it, he was painting me as hysterical. It was the same tactic he'd always used when we were married. If I cried, I was dramatic. If I disagreed, I was emotional. If I stood up for myself, I was impossible. But this time, I wasn't alone. Anna filed our response within hours. A clear, factual statement backed by evidence. We included copies of the bank logs, police reports, and legal correspondence. We weren't just defending ourselves. We were planting our flag in truth. Lena stayed calm through it all. Don't read the comments, she told me. Don't feed the fire. Let facts do the talking. Maria dug deeper into Hartman & Co.'s connections. She found that Ethan's assistant, a woman named Natalie Cruz, had been withdrawing small cash sums from a company account every Friday for 6 months. Each withdrawal matched dates linked to car rentals and locker payments. The amounts weren't large enough to trigger flags, but together they formed a perfect pattern. Maria smiled when she showed me the spreadsheet. This, she said, tapping the screen, is how you prove intent. They thought small amounts would stay invisible. But small steps leave big trails. Meanwhile, Officer Brooks worked quietly in the background. He kept me updated every few days. The DA's office is reviewing the case, he said. We're still verifying signatures and digital logs. But the evidence is mounting. Stay patient, patience. It was easy for him to say. I lived every day watching over my shoulder. That week, the tension inside me built to a breaking point. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. Once, while driving Liam to school, I spotted a dark sedan following us for 3 blocks. I took 3 turns and it followed each one. When I pulled into a crowded gas station, it slowed, then drove off. I called Maria right away. She told me to stay alert but calm. "They're testing your fear," she said. "They want you to react, to panic. Don't. You have more power now than they do." That was the strange truth. Power was shifting. The investigation had exposed cracks in Ethan's perfect image. His company's stock had dropped slightly. Rumors had begun to swirl online. And when powerful men start to lose control, they panic. 2 nights later, I got an email from an anonymous address. The subject line read, "I have proof." The message said only, "Meet me tomorrow. 9:30 p.m., Pier 14, come alone." Attached was a single photo. It showed Ethan shaking hands with a man I recognized instantly. Marcus Vale, the fixer who had rented the black SUV. My pulse quickened. Was it real? Or another trap? I forwarded it to Anna and Officer Brooks. Anna was cautious. "Don't go alone," she said firmly. "It could be bait," Brooks agreed. "If you go, we'll have someone nearby." Part of me wanted to ignore it. But another part, the mother, the fighter, the woman who'd already walked through fire, wanted to see it through. The next night, the pier was cold and silent. Waves crashed against the wooden posts. Streetlights flickered like dying candles. I stood there, heart racing, coat pulled tight. At exactly 9:30, a man stepped out from the shadows. He was thin, nervous, wearing a baseball cap. "You came alone?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Who are you?" He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. "Name's Carl. I worked for Marcus. Sometimes for Ethan, too. He paid us cash to do small things, pick up cars, deliver packages, send notes." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. "This has photos, payments, messages. Marcus kept backups in case Ethan tried to cut him off. I don't want to get involved, but I'm not going to prison for him either." I stared at the drive. "Why give this to me?" "Because he's cutting people loose," Carl said. "People are scared. You should be too." Before I could say another word, he turned and disappeared into the night. At home, I sat staring at the small drive on the table. It looked harmless, just plastic and metal, but it could hold everything we needed. I called Maria immediately. She came within 20 minutes, her laptop ready. Together, we plugged it in. Folders opened, hundreds of images and screenshots, receipts, bank statements. Messages between Marcus and Ethan. One file labeled CR Project caught my eye. When Maria opened it, we froze. It contained scanned documents of the fake accounts, everyone in my name. Beside each was a note from Ethan's assistant. "Transfer approved. Claire unaware." And at the bottom of one email chain, a message from Ethan himself. "Once the transaction clears, she's done. Make sure it looks accidental." The words made my blood run cold. It was proof. He hadn't just tried to scare me. He had planned to destroy me completely. Anna took the drive straight to Officer Brooks the next morning. Within hours, the DA's office issued an urgent order to seize Ethan's financial records. Hartman and Co. went into lockdown. By evening, Ethan's name was all over the news again, but this time, the story wasn't written by him. The headlines read, "Local businessman investigated for fraud and attempted harm after new evidence surfaces." They showed his photo, polished and smiling, beside words that stripped the shine from his reputation. I watched it unfold quietly from my living room. Liam was asleep. My father sat beside me, his hand over mine. Maria texted every few minutes with updates. And in that strange, heavy silence, I felt something shift deep inside me. Not victory. Not revenge. Just a deep, tired relief. The next day, as the world whispered about Ethan's downfall, I drove Liam to school under a clear sky. He looked at me from the back seat and asked, "Mommy, are the bad people gone now?" I smiled softly. "Almost, sweetheart, almost." He nodded thoughtfully, then pointed to the clouds. "The frog is dancing again." I laughed for the first time in months. Maybe he was right. Maybe the frog really was dancing again, because after months of darkness, fear, and silence, the truth had finally begun to breathe. When truth finally stepped into the light, it didn't walk quietly. It roared. By the second morning after the files leaked to the press, the city was buzzing. Headlines ran across every major network, each carrying variations of the same story. Hartman and Cubbers under investigation for fraud, money laundering, and attempted homicide. Ethan's name was everywhere. Every news anchor, every headline, every whisper in town revolved around him. The man who once seemed untouchable had become a headline no one wanted to be near. The stock in his company plummeted. His board of directors called for an emergency meeting. Some of his old partners gave statements, claiming they had no knowledge of his actions. It was the kind of chaos only power losing control can cause. Fast, ugly, and loud. But in my quiet kitchen, none of it felt like victory yet. It felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm, because men like Ethan don't go down without taking something, or someone bought with them. The morning news showed live footage outside Hartman & Co.'s glass headquarters. Reporters crowded the entrance. Cameras flashed. Officers from the Financial Crimes Division walked through the doors with boxes in their hands. Anna called around 8 a.m. Her voice was steady but alert. "It's happening, Claire. They've executed the warrants. The DA's office has the evidence from your drive, and more they pulled from the company's servers." "What does that mean?" I asked, clutching the phone tightly. "It means Ethan is cornered," she said. "But it also means he'll try to run, or worse, bargain." "Bargain?" "He might try to claim you were involved," she said quietly. "Or that you helped him before the divorce. That's the oldest play in the book. Drag the victim down with the guilty." My stomach sank. "He'd really do that?" "Claire," she said softly, "he's already tried to kill you once. There's no would he, there's only when." By noon, Officer Brooks called. "They've arrested 2 employees, his assistant, Natalie Cruz, and Marcus Vale," he said. "We have them in custody. Both are talking." Marcus admitted Ethan planned the crash. Natalie confirmed the forged accounts. "It's unraveling faster than we expected. For the first time in months, I could breathe. But even relief can carry fear. Because when truth starts collapsing a man's empire, desperation becomes his last weapon." That night, after Liam went to sleep, I sat by the window and watched the rain. Again. It had followed me through every chapter of this nightmare, as if the sky itself had been keeping score. But this time the sound wasn't sharp or angry. It was calm, steady, almost cleansing. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight slowly lifting off my chest. For the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. But at 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. The message read, "You think it's over, but I still have something you care about." My blood went cold. I ran to Liam's room. He was asleep, breathing softly, his tiny hand resting on his toy car. Safe. Untouched. Still shaking, I looked out the window. The street was empty except for the occasional car passing by. Then another message came through. Check your mailbox. I froze for a moment, then grabbed my phone and called my father. He lived 5 blocks away but answered on the first ring. "Dad, stay on the line," I whispered. "Something's wrong." I put the phone in my pocket and stepped outside into the rain. The mailbox stood at the end of the driveway, glistening under the porch light. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single small envelope. Soaked, smudged, but still sealed. I tore it open. Inside was a photo. It showed Liam walking to preschool, holding my father's hand. And behind them, a blurry figure in a black coat. Someone watching. There was no note this time. No words, just that image. It was a reminder. A message that even when Ethan was caged, his shadow was still free. I called Officer Brooks immediately. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived. They checked the area, took the envelope, and promised extra surveillance. Brooks pulled me aside. "We're doing everything we can," he said. "But there's always a chance someone loyal to Ethan is still out there. Maybe one of his hired men who hasn't been caught yet. So we're not safe yet?" "Not completely," he said honestly. "But safer than you were." He looked me straight in the eye. "We're getting close, Claire. Really close." The next few days felt like living between fear and relief. The news was filled with updates. Frozen accounts, missing documents, more arrests. Ethan's face appeared on every screen. Then finally the announcement came. Ethan Hartman, arrested. He had been caught trying to board a private flight to the Cayman Islands. Customs agents intercepted him using an international warrant. He was charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and conspiracy to commit homicide. I watched the footage of him being escorted by police. His once proud face looked pale, drawn, smaller somehow. Reporters shouted his name, but he didn't speak, and for a long moment I didn't either. I just stared at the screen, letting the image sink into me. That was the man who had once vowed to love me. The man who had shared my home, my meals, my life. And now he was being led away in handcuffs. Anna called later that evening. "It's official," she said, her voice soft. "He's been denied bail." "The evidence is overwhelming." I sat down slowly. "Is it really over this time?" "Yes," she said. "For him it is, but I knew better. For me it wasn't about revenge or endings. It was about healing, because when someone tries to erase you, even after they're gone, it takes time to remember who you were before the damage." A few days later, Lena published her follow-up article. It wasn't sensational. It was quiet, measured, and honest. Survivor of orchestrated crime rebuilds her life. How a mother's bravery helped expose a corporate fraud. The photo she used wasn't dramatic. It showed me holding Liam's hand outside the community center where the new foundation meetings were happening again. The caption read, "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the sound of starting over." The words made me cry. 1 week after the arrest, I took Liam to the park. He ran ahead, chasing butterflies and laughing, his small voice echoing across the playground. My father sat beside me on the bench, his eyes soft but tired. "He's free again," Dad said quietly. "The way a child should be," I nodded. "He deserves that. And you," he added, "deserve peace." I smiled faintly. "Maybe now we'll both have it." The wind blew gently through the trees, scattering leaves across the path. The world felt quiet again. Not empty, but calm. When we got home, I tucked Liam into bed. He held my hand for a while and whispered, "Mommy, is the bad man gone forever?" I brushed his hair back and said softly, "Yes, baby. He's gone." And this time, I meant it. He smiled, closed his eyes, and drifted into sleep. I sat there a moment longer, watching him breathe. He was my miracle, my anchor, the reason I hadn't given up. When he called Grandpa that night after the crash, he didn't just save me, he saved us both. And because of him, the truth finally had a voice. The morning after Ethan's arrest felt like waking up after a long storm. The world was quiet. Not peaceful yet, but still. The kind of silence that follows thunder when everything stands trembling and soaked, but still standing. For the first time in months, I didn't wake to fear. No more messages. No more whispers in the dark. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt empty. And somehow that emptiness was comforting. Liam was the first to sense the change. He ran into my room laughing, waving his toy cars in the air. "Mommy, we can go outside today." No more police, right? I smiled and hugged him tight. His little arms wrapped around me with the fierce love only children have. For him, life was simple again. But for me, peace wasn't that easy. Later that morning, I made tea and sat by the window. The rain had finally stopped. The light on the street looked softer, kinder. But inside me, something still trembled. It wasn't fear anymore. It was memory, because peace, I was learning, comes with its own cost. When the fight is over, what's left behind is everything the fight took from you. I thought about the woman I used to be, trusting, quiet, content with small joys. That woman was gone now. In her place stood someone harder, wiser, but tired. The bruises on my body had faded, but the ones inside hadn't. They didn't bleed. They echoed. And sometimes when the house went too quiet, I could still hear the crash, metal against metal. The scream of tires, Liam's tiny voice calling, "Mommy, wake up." I pressed my palms together, whispering to no one, "Thank you for saving me." In the weeks that followed, the investigation moved toward trial. Ethan's empire collapsed like glass under pressure. His assets were frozen. His partners withdrew. The foundation he had twisted for greed was shut down by court order. And yet, every day brought new paperwork, new questions, new reminders. It was exhausting. Anna guided me through each legal step, patient as always. "Justice takes time," she said, "but it will come." Some nights I wondered if it was worth it. All the pain, the exposure, the sleepless nights. But then I'd look at Liam sleeping safe in his bed, and I'd know the answer. Yes. It was worth it. Because truth is never cheap. And peace, real peace, always comes at a price. One afternoon, I went to see Lena at her office. She was writing the final piece, the one that would close the story. When she saw me, she smiled gently. "You look different," she said. "How so?" "Lighter," she said. "Like someone who stopped carrying something too heavy." I laughed softly. Maybe I just got used to the weight. She poured us both coffee and showed me the draft of her article. The headline read, "Courage After Chaos: How One Mother's Fight Exposed a Web of Lies." I read the first few lines and felt my throat tighten. She had written it like a love letter to survival, not a scandal. It wasn't about Ethan's downfall. It was about Liam. It was about hope. It was about us. When I finished, I wiped a tear and said quietly, "You told the story right." She smiled. "It's your story, Claire. I just gave it a voice." At home, life began to stitch itself back together, thread by thread. The foundation reopened under a new name, the Liam Project. It focused on helping single parents rebuild their lives after trauma. This time, I ran it differently. No big donors, no galas, no corporate sponsors. Just small, honest help for real people. Volunteers came back, Margaret, Ruth, and others who had stood by me through the years. They helped rebuild the office, repaint the walls, resort the files. It was simple work, but it healed something inside me. Because rebuilding something broken gives you the quiet satisfaction of saying, I survived this. And I made something better. One afternoon, my father stopped by with flowers. Tulips, red, the same ones Richard used to love. He placed them on the table and smiled. Your mother would have been proud, he said. I hugged him tightly. Dad, I couldn't have done any of this without you, he chuckled. That's what fathers are for. But truth be told, it wasn't me who saved you. It was that little boy of yours. I looked over at Liam, who was sitting on the floor, drawing with crayons. He had drawn us like a stick figure family holding hands under a big sun, and above it, in shaky letters, he had written, Me and Mommy safe now. Tears welled up in my eyes. He didn't know it, but those 4 words were worth more than all the court victories in the world. As the trial date neared, Anna asked if I wanted to attend. At first I said no. I thought seeing Ethan again would reopen wounds I had barely closed. But then, one night, as I watched Liam sleeping, I realized I needed to face it. Not for him, not for revenge, but for closure. So on the day of the hearing, I walked into that cold courtroom. Ethan sat at the defense table wearing the same perfect suit and empty confidence. But when he looked at me, something was gone from his eyes. That sharp, smug certainty. He looked small. The prosecutor read the charges. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy, attempted murder. Each word sounded like a stone dropping into still water. When they asked if I wanted to speak, I stood up slowly and said, I don't want revenge. I just want my son to grow up in a world where people like him don't win. And then I sat down. That was all I needed to say. Ethan was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The courtroom was silent when the verdict came. He didn't look at me again. He just stared at the table as they led him away. When it was over, I stepped outside into the sunlight. The air was crisp, clean, alive. I closed my eyes and breathed it in deeply. That moment felt like forgiveness, not for him, but for myself. I had survived the worst, and I was still standing. That evening, back home, I cooked Liam's favorite dinner, spaghetti with too much cheese. We ate, laughed, and talked about his school project. He told me he wanted to be a super helper when he grew up, someone who helps people feel safe. I smiled. You already are, sweetheart, he laughed. Then I'm done growing. I tucked him into bed, kissed his forehead, and turned off the light. When I walked out, the moonlight spilled through the window, soft and silver. For the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't afraid of the dark. The world was quiet again. Not perfect, not unbroken, but free. And that was enough, because sometimes peace doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means learning to live with it gently and not letting it control you anymore. That's the cost of peace. And I was finally ready to pay it. Peace didn't arrive like a sunrise. It came slowly, quietly, like morning light slipping under a door. It came in the smell of fresh paint, in the laughter of volunteers, in the sound of Liam's little shoes running down the hallway of our new foundation. The Liam project had finally opened. It wasn't big or fancy. Just 2 bright rooms and 1 small office above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon every morning. The walls were white, the curtains a warm yellow, and the air always carried the sound of hope. On the front door hung a simple sign, helping single parents rebuild, 1 step, 1 story, 1 smile at a time. Every time I unlocked that door, I felt something loosen inside me, like I was finally undoing the knots that years of fear had tied around my heart. Our first group meeting was small. Just 4 parents, 2 mothers, a father, and 1 grandmother raising her grandson alone. They sat in a circle, hesitant at first, unsure what to say. I understood that silence. It's the same silence that lives in people who've been broken. Not because they're weak, but because they've been strong for too long. So I started with my own story. I didn't talk about Ethan by name. I didn't mention the details of his crimes. I just told them what it felt like to lose everything, and to wake up one day realizing that the person who saved you was only 4 years old. By the time I finished, the room was quiet. Then the grandmother, Mrs. Davis, wiped her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." I thought I was the only one who felt like that. And just like that, the walls between us began to crumble. In the following weeks, more people came. Single mothers escaping toxic homes, fathers fighting for custody, women learning to manage their own finances after years of dependence. We offered workshops, legal advice, emotional counseling, but most importantly, we offered listening ears. Sometimes people don't need rescue. They just need to be seen. And as I listened to their stories, I saw pieces of myself in each of them. The fear, the shame, the guilt for things they never caused. And I told them again and again, "You're not broken. You're becoming." One afternoon, while reorganizing supplies, I found Liam sitting on the floor of the office, drawing again. He had sketched a small version of our building, with stick figure people smiling inside. He wrote at the top, "Mommy's Place for Brave People." When I asked him why he called it that, he said, "Because everyone who comes here is brave, even you." I couldn't speak. I just pulled him into my arms and held him. He didn't know it, but that simple sentence was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me. Maria still worked closely with me, handling the security systems and website. Anna remained a close friend, often visiting to give legal workshops to our clients. Even Lena stopped by once, bringing coffee and warm smiles. The foundation wasn't just helping others. It had quietly become the family I didn't know I needed. Sometimes, after everyone left, I'd stay late, tidying up and thinking. The office smelled like coffee and paper and fresh beginnings. The hum of the city outside reminded me that life never really stops. It just changes tempo, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what would come next. The world outside still carried whispers of the case. Ethan's name appeared in the news once more when the court rejected his appeal. But it didn't shake me anymore. He was a shadow now, one that could no longer reach me. Instead, I focused on the light in front of me. Each day, someone new walked through our door, lost, frightened, uncertain, and left a little stronger than they came. It reminded me that healing isn't about forgetting pain. It's about helping someone else carry theirs until they can walk again. That became our mission. Quiet, steady, real. One morning, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, simple, no return address. For a moment, my heart skipped. Old fears still lingered like echoes. But when I opened it, I found not a threat, but gratitude. "Dear Claire, you don't know me, but I read about your story and your project. I was scared to leave my marriage, but after seeing what you built, I finally did. My daughter and I are safe now. Thank you for reminding me that we're not alone." Many tears filled my eyes. That letter was worth more than all the applause or awards in the world. It meant my pain had turned into purpose. And maybe that's what survival truly means, not just living after the fire, but lighting a path for someone else through the smoke. A few weeks later, the city invited me to speak at a local women's conference. At first, I said no. I didn't like stages anymore. But Maria and Anna convinced me. Tell them, Maria said. Not about the crime and about the courage. So I went. I stood before a room full of strangers and told them what I'd learned. That strength doesn't always roar. That sometimes strength is just getting up one more time than you fall. That forgiveness isn't weakness. It's choosing to live without letting pain make you cruel. The applause at the end wasn't loud. It was gentle. Like rain after drought. And in that moment, I realized something beautiful. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. That evening, after the event, I took Liam for ice cream. He chose chocolate with rainbow sprinkles. I picked vanilla, simple, safe, familiar. As we sat on a bench, he looked at me with those big, curious eyes and said, "Mommy, are we happy now?" I smiled, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "We're happy now." He grinned, his teeth covered in chocolate. "Then we should tell the frog." I laughed. "What frog?" "The frog who dances on the clouds," he said, giggling. "He's been waiting for us to be happy again." I looked up at the sky. The clouds glowed orange and pink with the setting sun. And for a brief, magical second, I could almost see it. A tiny frog dancing, smiling, free. As we walked home hand in hand, I thought about everything we'd lost and everything we'd found again. Peace, purpose, freedom. The road had been long, cruel, and unforgiving. But it had led us here, to a quiet evening, to a child's laughter, to a future that finally felt safe. That was the true rebuilding. Not the walls or the office or the foundation, but us. Years later, when I think about that time in my life, it doesn't feel like a nightmare anymore. It feels like a story that belonged to someone else, someone I used to be. The fear, the sirens, the crash, the threats, the courtroom, they all live in another lifetime now, sealed behind glass, where I can look at them without breaking. Time has a strange way of softening even the sharpest pain. Not by erasing it, but by teaching you to hold it differently. And that's what I learned. You don't heal by forgetting. You heal by remembering without hurting. 10 years had passed. Liam was 14 now, tall, confident, with the same bright smile he had when he was 4. He was still curious, still kind, still brave. Only now he carried that bravery quietly, without even knowing it was rare. He didn't remember much about the crash, just flashes, sounds, feelings. But he remembered what came after. He remembered the foundation, the laughter in our small office, the people who found strength again. He grew up surrounded by survivors, people who taught him that courage isn't loud. That was his world, and it shaped him into something extraordinary. The Liam Project had grown beyond anything I ever imagined. What started as 2 rooms above a bakery had turned into a full center with branches in 3 cities. We offered legal aid, trauma counseling, financial literacy, and, most importantly, hope. Every time I walked into the main office and saw the people waiting, mothers, fathers, teenagers, I felt humbled. Because each face carried a story, and every story carried a spark of strength. We had a saying printed on our walls in big warm letters: "You survived. Now let's rebuild." And under it, in smaller writing, "Because bravery begins the moment you decide not to disappear." Maria still managed the technical side of the foundation. Anna had become part of the board, offering free legal aid. Even Lena stayed connected, writing about our projects from time to time, her words still soft and steady as rain. My father, older but strong, visited the office often. He'd bring coffee for the staff and candy for the children. He never stopped reminding me, "You turned pain into purpose, Claire. That's how you beat the past." He was right. Every year on the anniversary of the crash, Liam and I kept a quiet ritual. We'd drive out to the small lake near the edge of town, the one with the old wooden dock and the field of tulips nearby. We'd bring two things: his little toy car from that night and a paper frog we folded together. We'd set them both on the water and watch them float away until they disappeared. The first time we did it, he was 7. He asked, "Why do we do this, Mommy?" I said, "Because it reminds us that even things that sink leave ripples." He smiled, nodded, and whispered, "The frog will dance again." Now, at 14, he still said it every year. But this time, when we stood by the lake, he surprised me. He looked taller, older, thoughtful. "Mom," he said softly, "do you think people ever really stop being scared?" The question caught me off guard. I looked at him, his face half lit by the fading sun. I thought of all the nights I had stayed awake, listening for sounds that never came, the dreams that still sometimes woke me. "No," I said honestly. "I think fear never really leaves." "But that's okay." He frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because fear reminds us we're still alive," I said. "It tells us what matters. The trick isn't to stop being afraid. It's to live so fear doesn't get to decide who you are." He nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the water. Then he said, "That's what brave means, right?" I smiled. "Exactly." He took a deep breath, set the paper frog on the water, and whispered, "Then we're brave, Mom." And as the paper frog drifted into the sunset, I realized that was true, not just for him, but for everyone we'd helped. Everyone who had come through those doors broken and left whole again. That evening, back home, I sat at my desk, flipping through old letters and photos. Among them was a yellowed piece of paper, a copy of Liam's first drawing. Stick figures under the sun, the words written in his uneven handwriting, "Me and Mommy safe now." I framed it and hung it on the wall of my office. It was the only award I ever needed. In time, the story of Ethan and Hartman and Co. were faded from public memory. The trial became a case study in law schools. People forgot the names, the scandal, the noise. But that was how it should be, because this story was never really about him. It was about the people who lived after him, who refused to let one man's cruelty define their lives. I had forgiven him in my heart, not because he deserved it, but because I refused to let hate keep its claws in me. That's what freedom truly is, letting go without forgetting. Years later, when Liam left for college, I stood in his empty room and smiled through my tears. He had grown into everything I hoped he'd be: strong, kind, fearless. Before he left, he hugged me tightly and said, "I'll make you proud, Mom, and I'll make the frog proud too." I laughed and said, "He already is." Watching him walk away, suitcase in hand, I realized something. My story had come full circle. Once upon a time, I thought survival was about fighting back. Now I knew it was about moving forward, and knowing that sometimes the ones we raise become the ones who carry our courage further than we ever could. Every night, before locking up the foundation, I'd step outside and look at the mural we painted on the wall. It showed a mother holding a child, both surrounded by floating paper frogs. Below it, in simple letters, were the words, "Bravery is contagious." And it was, because courage doesn't end with survival. It passes on in our children, our students, our friends. It becomes legacy. As I locked the door and walked home under the evening sky, I saw a small puddle by the curb. A frog sat there, perfectly still, its eyes reflecting the streetlight. I smiled. "Dance away, little one," I whispered. And somewhere inside me, the girl I once was, scared, broken, waiting for the next storm, smiled too, because the storm was over, and the world at last was safe again. The world has a way of circling back, not to repeat what hurt you, but to show you how far you've come since. That truth found me one quiet afternoon, years after everything had ended, when the mailman knocked on my door with a package wrapped in brown paper. It was ordinary. No fancy label, no return address, no markings except my name written in neat, almost hesitant handwriting. Claire Monroe. Something about the handwriting made me pause. It wasn't the same cold, sharp writing of old threats. This felt softer, careful, almost grateful. I took it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and just looked at it for a moment. The house was quiet. Liam had been away at college for nearly 2 years now. My father had passed the year before peacefully, holding my hand and whispering, "You did it, sweetheart. You gave him a future." The foundation was still running strong. Maria now directed operations, Anna had retired, and new, younger faces carried the mission forward. My days had slowed down, filled with sunlight, letters, and small acts of helping, guiding others the way I once needed guidance myself. But that package, it brought something with it. A whisper from the past. When I finally opened it, a small journal slipped out. Old, worn leather, faded pages. Inside was a folded note on top, written in unfamiliar handwriting. "Dear Claire, you don't know me, but your story saved my life. I was once where you were, afraid, ashamed, certain no one would believe me. I read about you years ago when I was hiding. I remember one sentence from your interview. You're not broken. You're becoming. I kept those words in my pocket for 3 years. Today I'm free. My children are safe. I started writing this journal the day I left, and I want you to have it. Because you gave me courage when I had none left. With love, Mariah." I pressed my hand against the page, my eyes blurring. Mariah. A stranger. Someone I'd never met. Yet, somehow, she'd carried a piece of my story in her heart and turned it into her own freedom. I opened the journal. The first page read, "Day 1, I left. I'm terrified. But I left." The pages that followed were raw, real, and beautiful. Stories of fear, healing, motherhood, and small victories. There were drawings from her children, taped photos, and little notes like, "Today I laughed again." By the last page, her handwriting had changed. It was steady now, confident. I learned that pain doesn't vanish when you leave. It just has room to heal, and I learned that bravery isn't loud. It's whispering, "I can do this," while you pack your bags. I closed the journal slowly, tears spilling down my cheeks. That was it. That was the circle. Pain had turned into strength, and strength had become legacy. The story that once nearly broke me had become the story that helped someone else live. That night, I drove to the old office, the original Liam project above the bakery. The building had changed owners, but the woman who ran the bakery, Mrs. Rivera, still remembered me. When she saw me walk in, she smiled. "It's been years," she said, handing me a cup of coffee. "You used to come in here looking so tired. Now you look peaceful," I laughed softly. "I guess time works better than therapy sometimes." I sat by the window where I once dreamed of freedom and read Mariah's letter again under the golden light. Outside, life moved as usual. People hurrying home, children chasing each other, a couple sharing an umbrella. I wondered how many of them carried silent battles no one else could see. And I hoped that maybe, just maybe, they'd find their way through it. Like I did. Like Mariah did. Like so many of us did. The next morning, I brought the journal to the main foundation office. Maria was in her usual spot, surrounded by papers, coffee mugs, and her laptop. When she saw the journal in my hands, she raised an eyebrow. Another story? Something better, I said. A legacy. We decided to create something new that day. A small library inside the foundation called the Courage Shelf. We filled it with letters, journals, and stories from people who had found their way back from darkness. No big speeches, no ceremonies, just stories left quietly for others to find when they needed them most. And on the first shelf, we placed Mariah's journal, open to her last page. Beside it, we added a small plaque that read, "Shared pain becomes shared strength." That became our new motto. A few months later, Liam came home for the holidays. He was taller now, broader in the shoulders, but his eyes were still the same, bright and full of curiosity. He'd been studying psychology, specializing in trauma recovery. When I asked him why, he smiled and said, "Because I grew up watching you rebuild people, Mom. I want to do the same." I couldn't speak for a moment. I just hugged him tightly and whispered, "You already do." That night, we walked by the lake again. He brought two things, another toy car and a new paper frog, neatly folded. We placed them on the water together, just as we always did. The wind carried them slowly across the surface, the reflection of the moon shimmering around them. "Do you think it ever really ends?" he asked quietly. "What, sweetheart?" "The fear. The hurt." I looked at the drifting frog and said, "No, but it changes. It turns into something else, like wind that used to storm, now just guiding the sails." He nodded, thoughtful. "Then maybe that's what healing is." "Yes," I said softly. "Exactly that. Years teach you that closure isn't one big moment. It's 1,000 small ones. It's waking up and realizing the nightmares are just memories. It's smiling without guilt. It's learning that you don't have to be who pain made you. And for me, it was this. Standing beside my son, watching a paper frog dance on the water, knowing the story had come full circle. When we got home, Liam found an old photo tucked behind one of the frames, the one from years ago, where I stood in front of the new foundation sign holding his tiny hand. He smiled. "You know, Mom, you didn't just build a place for brave people. You became one." I laughed softly. "Maybe, but I had a very good teacher." He tilted his head. "Who?" "You," I said. "When you were 4, you taught me what courage really means." He grinned. The frog taught both of us. That night before bed, I wrote one last entry in my own journal, the one I had kept all those years but never finished. It's strange. You spend half your life trying to survive storms, and the other half realizing the storms made you strong enough to love the rain. I thought my story ended the night of the crash. But it was just beginning. Because courage doesn't die, it multiplies. Liam's story will be different. And that's how I know I've done enough. I closed the book, set it beside my bed, and turned off the light. For a long time, I listened to the quiet hum of the night, steady, soft, alive, and just before sleep found me, I smiled and whispered, "Dance, little frog. You did it." Time moved gently now. The years no longer rushed by in storms. They passed like calm waves against a steady shore. I was older, yes, with streaks of silver in my hair and softer lines on my face. But I had earned every one of them. They were not the marks of age. They were the signature of survival. The foundation was thriving. The Liam Project had expanded across the country, and people often sent letters sharing how their lives had changed after walking through its doors. Each story was a reminder that pain, when shared, loses its teeth. But one story, one visit, would remind me that even the smallest act of courage can become someone else's miracle. It was a crisp autumn morning when she arrived. I was in my office, sorting through applications for a new mentorship program, when my assistant knocked gently and said, "Claire, there's a young woman here to see you. She says she doesn't have an appointment, but you might want to meet her." There was something in her tone. Soft, urgent. I nodded. "Send her in." The door opened and a girl stepped inside. No, not a girl. A young woman, maybe 20. She had nervous eyes, a trembling hand clutching a folded piece of paper, and a familiar kind of fear hiding behind a polite smile. She reminded me of myself from years ago, fragile, yet holding herself together with invisible thread. "Hi," she said quietly. "My name's Emily. I'm sorry for coming without notice." I smiled gently. "That's all right, Emily. How can I help you?" She hesitated, glancing down at the paper in her hand. I don't really know where to start." "Start anywhere," I said softly. "This is a safe place." She took a deep breath. "I was in an abusive relationship. He's in jail now, but I still have nightmares. I can't sleep without leaving the light on. And I don't know how to start living again." Her voice broke on the last word, and tears filled her eyes. She tried to hide them, but I shook my head gently. "It's okay to cry here," I said. She nodded, wiping her cheeks, and handed me the folded paper. "I found this in a book my mom gave me when I left him. She said it might help me. I think it's from one of your interviews." I unfolded the paper. It was an old printed quote, yellowed at the edges. "You're not broken. You're becoming." I stared at it for a long moment, my throat tightening. Emily noticed my silence and said, "When I read that, I decided not to give up. I thought, if she could survive what she went through, maybe I can too." Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. After all these years, those words, the ones I'd said in passing, had traveled farther than I ever imagined. They had found someone who needed them, at just the right time. I reached across the desk and took her hand. "Emily," I said, "I want you to know something important. You already started living again. The moment you walked through that door, you began." She cried harder then, but they weren't the same kind of tears. They were the kind that washed away old pain. We talked for over an hour. About fear, about trust, about learning to breathe again without waiting for the next blow. By the end, she smiled, just a little, and it was enough. When she left, I stood by the window watching her go, her steps slow but steady. And I realized something beautiful. My survival had birthed 1,000 small miracles I might never see. Ripples that began with pain but ended in hope. That was the quiet miracle. That evening, I went to the old lake again. It had become a yearly tradition, even after Liam moved away. He was 24 now, a counselor, helping others rebuild the way I once helped him. He couldn't make it that year, but he'd sent me a message. "Mom, don't forget the frog. Let him dance for both of us." So I did. I stood by the dock, the autumn leaves floating like tiny boats, and set the paper frog on the water. It drifted gently, carried by the breeze, its reflection glimmering in the golden light of sunset. And as I watched it float away, I whispered, "For every woman who thought she couldn't, for every child who still believes, for every person learning to rebuild, this is for you. The water carried my words farther than I could see. Later that night, when I returned home, I found an envelope waiting on my porch. No name, no stamp, just a single piece of paper inside. It read, "You don't know me, but my mother was Mariah. She passed away last year." I found her journal on the courage shelf, and I wanted to tell you. Her daughter now works here, helping others. Thank you for giving my mother back her life. Because she gave me mine. I sank into the chair by the window and cried, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. All the years of fear, loss, and fight had led to this, a world where one woman's courage became another's salvation. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Courage doesn't end with us. It multiplies, passed hand to hand, heart to heart, story to story. The next morning, I called Liam. He answered from his small apartment in another city, his voice cheerful as always. "Hey, Mom!" Did the frog dance? I laughed through tears. He did. And he brought friends this time, he chuckled. That's how it should be. Love multiplies, right? Yes, I said softly. So does courage. There was a pause. Then he said, "I'm proud of you, Mom." I smiled, wiping my tears. "I'm proud of you too, sweetheart. You're the reason all of this exists." That night, before going to bed, I opened my old journal one last time. The same one I had closed years ago after writing, "Liam's story will be different." On the last page, I wrote, "It's strange. I once thought my story ended in a car crash, but now I know it truly began with a phone call from a 4-year-old boy. He said, 'Mommy's hurt.' And in saving me, he saved everyone who came after. I thought the world was cruel. But the world gave me Liam, and Liam gave me love that outlived fear." I set the pen down, closed the journal, and placed it beside Mariah's. 2 lives, 2 journeys, connected by courage. And as the wind brushed softly against the window, I thought of the frog once more, forever dancing on the clouds, reminding me that even after storms, something small and joyful always survives. It had been almost 30 years since the night that changed everything. The night of the crash. The night my 4-year-old son dialed a phone and saved both our lives. And now, sitting on my porch with a cup of tea in my hands, I watched the sky turn gray again. The first drops began to fall, soft and slow, like the opening notes of an old song I'd forgotten the words to. I smiled. There was a time when rain made my chest tighten, when the sound of it would drag me back to twisted metal, broken glass, and fear. But not anymore. Now rain felt like life. It was the sound of things growing, washing, beginning again. Because in the end, everything, even the hardest things, they comes full circle. The world had changed around me. The Liam Project was no longer just a local foundation. It had become a movement. There were branches in 7 countries now, each run by people who had their own stories of survival, love, and renewal. When I walked into our new headquarters, a bright, airy building filled with laughter and sunlight, I often thought back to that tiny office above the bakery. The smell of cinnamon, the nervous hope that lived in the walls. The paper sign on the door that read, "Helping Single Parents Rebuild." We never changed those words. Because they were true then, and they were still true now. I had stepped back from daily operations years ago. Maria had retired to the countryside. Anna volunteered part-time teaching young lawyers about ethics. And Lena had written a book about the power of human resilience. And Liam, my beautiful, brave boy, now ran the foundation himself. He was 34, tall, confident, gentle, a man with his father's quiet intelligence, but his mother's heart. He never raised his voice, yet when he spoke, people listened. He had become the kind of man who carried other people's pain with grace and gave them back hope instead. He often said to me, "You built this, Mom. I'm just keeping it alive." But he was wrong. He hadn't kept it alive. He had expanded it, deepened it, turned it into something greater than I could have dreamed. He was the proof that love can rewrite even the darkest legacy. One afternoon, as we sat together in his office, he showed me a new initiative, a scholarship fund for children of survivors. At the top of the brochure was a small, simple image, a paper frog. I laughed softly. "Still dancing, is he?" Liam grinned. "Always. The frog's part of the logo now. It's the symbol of the foundation." He paused, then looked at me with a spark in his eyes. "Do you remember what you told me when I was little? That the frog dances when the storm is over?" I nodded, smiling. "Of course I do." "Well," he said, leaning back, "I think he dances because of the storm, not after it. Otherwise, he'd never learn how to jump." I stared at him for a long moment, and tears filled my eyes. He had grown wiser than I ever was. "You're right," I whispered. "He dances because of the storm." And I realized that was true for us too. We hadn't survived despite the storms. We had survived through them. The storms had shaped our strength, not stolen it. When the day came that the board renamed the annual Courage Award, I sat quietly in the audience, my hands clasped in my lap. The presenter, a young woman named Emily, who had once walked through our doors shaking with fear, stood at the podium and said, "This year, we rename this award in honor of the woman who taught us that survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. Please welcome the new name, the Claire Monroe Courage Award." The audience stood. Applause filled the room, but I couldn't stand right away. I sat there with tears streaming down my face, overwhelmed not by pride, but by awe, at the idea that something born out of so much pain could turn into so much good. And as Emily spoke about the first recipient, a young single father who rebuilt his life from nothing, I looked at Liam, who was clapping proudly from the front row. He caught my gaze, smiled softly, and mouthed the words, "You did this." I shook my head, mouthing back, "No, we did," because it was true. None of this belonged to just one of us. It belonged to everyone who had ever believed, even for 1 second, that they could survive. After the ceremony, I went outside alone. It had started raining again, light, soft rain. People hurried under umbrellas, but I didn't. I walked slowly down the street, letting the drops fall on my face, soaking into my gray hair, cooling my warm cheeks. It was the same kind of rain that had once terrified me. But now it was like a friend, familiar, cleansing, forgiving. I passed a small park and stopped under the old oak tree where children were laughing, chasing puddles, letting paper boats float down the stream. Among them, I saw a little boy carefully folding a piece of paper into a frog shape. His mother, sitting nearby, smiled when she saw me watching. "He makes them all the time," she said. "Says they bring good luck," I chuckled. "He's right, you know." "They do." The boy smiled shyly and held it up to me. "Do you want one?" I knelt beside him, water dripping from my coat, and said, "I'd love one." He handed it to me proudly. "His name's Cloudy," he said, "because he dances when it rains." My throat tightened. "He's perfect." When I got home, I set the paper frog on my desk beside an old photograph. One of Liam and me years ago, standing outside that little office above the bakery. Behind us was the hand-painted sign that read, Helping single parents rebuild. The ink had faded, but the words still glowed. And next to it now sat the little frog, cloudy, dancing under invisible rain. I smiled and whispered, "We're still dancing, aren't we?" The house was quiet, but in that silence I could almost hear it. The sound of laughter, of life, of rain hitting windows softly. I sat down and opened my journal one last time. My handwriting had grown shakier over the years, but the words still flowed steady. It rained again today, and this time I smiled, because rain no longer means endings to me. It means everything grows again, my sun is strong, the world is kind again, and fear doesn't live here anymore. I've learned that survival is not a finish line. It's a garden. And every act of courage, every tear, every moment of hope becomes a seed that someone else will water. I close the book, my hands trembling slightly but my heart calm. Outside, the rain fell harder, steady and beautiful. The world shimmered under its touch, alive, forgiving and whole, and as I sat there, breathing in the scent of wet earth and peace, I realized something that took me a lifetime to understand. Sometimes, the greatest miracle isn't surviving the storm. It's learning to love the rain. Claire's story began with a crash and ended in calm, not because the world stopped hurting, but because she learned how to turn pain into purpose. Her courage became the bridge between generations, proving that even when it rains again, love always finds its way through.